For more than 4 decades, she existed in the shadows of a mystery nobody could solve. On a cold morning in Texas, investigators discovered the body of a young girl beside a lonely stretch of highway. She carried no identification. No one came looking for her. No missing persons report immediately revealed who she was. To the world, she became a name that wasn't a name at all: Walker County Jane Doe. But behind that label was a real teenager. A daughter. A sister. A girl who had dreams, fears, and a future that should have stretched far beyond her 14th year. The details surrounding her death shocked experienced investigators, yet one question haunted everyone even more than the crime itself. Who was she? As years turned into decades, leads vanished, memories faded, and evidence grew older. Still, her story refused to disappear. Detectives, volunteers, and ordinary people became obsessed with finding the truth. Because somewhere there had to be a family missing her. And somewhere, hidden beneath 40 years of silence, was a secret waiting to be uncovered. In the days that followed the discovery, investigators worked relentlessly to find even the smallest clue that could reveal who the young girl was. Witnesses began coming forward. Some believed they had seen her at a roadside restaurant. Others thought they had spoken with her near a truck stop. A few claimed she mentioned traveling across Texas. One story suggested she might have been trying to reach someone connected to a nearby prison. Every lead sounded promising. And every lead seemed to dissolve the moment detectives looked closer. The girl carried almost nothing that could explain where she had come from. A necklace remained one of the few personal items found with her, a fragile reminder that she had once belonged somewhere. Yet even that produced no answers. Then another discovery raised fresh questions. A bag recovered miles away contained personal belongings and information connected to people in Colorado. Investigators immediately followed the trail, hoping they had finally found the breakthrough they desperately needed. But once again the path ended in disappointment. Weeks became months. Months became years. Without a confirmed identity, the young victim was eventually buried as an unknown girl. Her name was lost. Her story unfinished. Yet many refused to let her be forgotten. Because deep down, they believed the truth was still waiting somewhere beyond the silence. Most cold cases slowly fade from public memory. This one never did. Year after year, Walker County Jane Doe remained one of the most discussed unidentified victims in America. Detectives changed. Administrations changed. Entire generations grew up. Yet the mystery continued to haunt everyone who encountered it. There was something impossible to ignore about the case. A teenage girl, seemingly from a stable background, had appeared on a Texas highway with no clear explanation of who she was or how she got there. The contrast disturbed people. She didn't fit the profile many expected. She wasn't just a statistic in a file cabinet. She felt real. Across the growing internet, amateur researchers, journalists, and concerned citizens shared photographs, theories, and age-progressed reconstructions. Thousands became emotionally invested in the search for her identity. Some spent years comparing missing person reports. Others analyzed witness statements and forgotten records. Still no answer emerged. In 1999, hope briefly returned when investigators exhumed her remains, believing modern DNA testing might finally reveal her name. If science could speak where witnesses had failed, perhaps the mystery would end. But the results brought only more disappointment. The technology of the time could not provide the breakthrough everyone desperately wanted. Once again the trail went cold. And the young girl remained trapped between memory and anonymity. By the time a new generation of investigators took another look at the case, more than 40 years had passed. For many departments, a case this old would have been considered impossible. But Detective Thomas Bean couldn't stop thinking about the girl who had never been identified. Somewhere, he believed, a family still wondered what had happened. Somewhere, someone was missing a sister, a daughter, a child who had vanished without explanation. That belief led investigators to a company called Othram, a forensic laboratory specializing in some of the most difficult identification cases in the country. Their mission was simple in theory: use DNA to restore names to the unnamed. The challenge was that this case had already defeated countless attempts. When scientists received the skeletal remains, optimism quickly turned into frustration. The DNA was so degraded that it appeared unusable. Decades of time, environmental exposure, and previous testing efforts had left almost nothing behind. For a moment, it seemed as though the mystery had reached a dead end once again. The disappointment was crushing. After all these years, after all the waiting, even science appeared unable to help. But as investigators reviewed every surviving piece of evidence, they uncovered something unexpected. A forgotten clue had survived the passage of time. And it was hidden inside a laboratory drawer no one expected to matter anymore. The breakthrough didn't come from a forgotten witness. It didn't come from a hidden report. It came from something most people would have considered worthless. While searching through old records and evidence inventories, investigators learned that a private laboratory still possessed microscopic slides created during the victim's autopsy in 1980. Trapped on those thin pieces of glass were tiny traces of preserved tissue. It wasn't much. In fact, it was probably the worst type of biological evidence a forensic scientist could hope to receive. The tissue had been treated with chemicals designed to preserve it for examination, not for DNA recovery. Over the decades, those chemicals had effectively glued and damaged the genetic material researchers desperately needed. Yet it was the only chance left. Scientists knew the risk. Extracting DNA from the slides could permanently destroy the sample. If the attempt failed, there might never be another opportunity to identify the girl. For a moment, everyone faced an impossible question. Do you protect the last surviving evidence? Or do you gamble everything on a procedure that had never successfully solved a case like this before? The answer would determine whether the mystery remained buried forever, or whether the girl who had lost her name might finally get it back. The decision was made. They would try. But before touching the precious evidence, the scientists faced a problem that had never been fully solved. The DNA trapped inside those decades-old slides was damaged, fragmented, and chemically bound together in ways that made traditional testing almost impossible. Failure wasn't just a possibility. It was the most likely outcome. Rather than rushing forward, the team did something unusual. They stopped. 4 months and then more than a year, researchers focused on developing entirely new methods. They created experimental samples, deliberately preserving tissue with the same chemicals used decades earlier. Again and again they tested ways to reverse the damage without destroying what remained. Progress came slowly. Every breakthrough seemed to reveal another obstacle. Yet with every experiment they learned a little more about how the hidden DNA might be recovered. Back in Texas, investigators waited. The case had already remained unsolved for over 40 years. A few more months felt insignificant compared to the possibility of finally learning who the girl was. Eventually the phone call came. The researchers believed they were ready. There were no guarantees. The sample could still be lost forever. But for the first time, science had given them a reason to hope. And after decades of uncertainty, hope was something they could not afford to ignore. The moment of truth arrived inside a sequencing laboratory. After years of waiting, months of research, and countless failed possibilities, the fragile sample was finally processed. Then came the longest wait of all. Scientists watched as the sequencing machines analyzed fragments of DNA that had survived more than 4 decades. At first, the results looked chaotic. Portions of the genetic code were missing. Some sections appeared damaged beyond recognition. No one celebrated. Not yet. But hidden within the noise was something extraordinary. There was enough information. Not perfect information. Not complete information. But enough. The team carefully reconstructed a usable genetic profile, removing errors, identifying reliable markers, and building the strongest DNA blueprint they could from the fragile evidence. Every step demanded caution. A mistake could send investigators toward the wrong family and create heartbreak for innocent people. When the profile was finally complete, it was uploaded to genealogy databases where participants had agreed to help identify unknown individuals. The search began. Almost immediately, distant relatives started appearing. A pattern emerged. The DNA pointed away from Texas entirely. The unknown girl seemed connected to a family hundreds of miles away in the American Midwest. For the first time since 1980, investigators were no longer asking who she might be. They were asking which member of a specific family had disappeared without ever being found. The genetic clues had narrowed the search dramatically. Now investigators needed to do what no computer could do. They had to find the family. Using names connected through genealogical records, detectives began tracing relatives one by one. Obituaries, public documents, family histories, every available record was examined. Slowly a picture started to emerge. Most family members could be accounted for. One could not. Among the names listed in family records was a young girl whose trail seemed to vanish decades earlier. The more investigators searched, the more convinced they became that they had found their missing person. Still, belief wasn't enough. They needed confirmation. Detective Thomas Bean began making phone calls. One after another. Most were difficult conversations. He was asking strangers about events that had happened more than 40 years before. Many people were understandably cautious. Some were confused. Others were emotional. Then came a call he would never forget. A woman answered. Bean introduced himself and explained that he was investigating a cold case from 1980. Before he could continue, the woman interrupted him. "You're calling about my sister." In that instant, decades of uncertainty seemed to collapse into a single moment. The family had never forgotten. They had spent years wondering what happened after their sister disappeared. Now, for the first time in more than 4 decades, investigators believed they finally knew the answer. All that remained was proving it beyond any doubt. The final confirmation came through DNA. Family members agreed to provide samples, allowing investigators to compare their genetic information against the profile built from the decades-old evidence. It was the last step in a journey that had taken more than 40 years. When the results arrived, there was no uncertainty left. Walker County Jane Doe finally had her name back. She was Sherri Jarvis. Not an unidentified victim. Not a cold case label. Not a mystery. a 14-year-old girl from Minnesota. As investigators learned more about her life, a heartbreaking story began to emerge. According to family accounts, Sherri had struggled with truancy during her early teenage years. After becoming involved with state authorities, she eventually left home and disappeared. Months later, she somehow found her way hundreds of miles from Minnesota. Then, on Halloween night in 1980, her journey came to a tragic end in Texas. For decades, her family had lived without answers. Now they finally knew what had happened. The announcement sent shockwaves through the true crime community and beyond. People who had followed the case for years felt the emotional weight of the moment. Detectives who had dedicated parts of their careers to the mystery felt something they had never experienced before. Relief. Because after 41 years, the girl without a name was gone. And Sherri Jarvis had finally come home. Many people describe the end of an investigation as closure. The investigators in this case disagree. Because no DNA profile, no press conference, and no identification can erase what happened to Sherri Jarvis. What they can provide is something equally important: the truth. For more than 4 decades, Sherri's family lived with unanswered questions. They knew she had disappeared. They hoped she might somehow return. Instead, the years passed in silence while their daughter and sister remained known only as Walker County Jane Doe. Now that silence had finally been broken. Yet one mystery remained. Who killed Sherri Jarvis? The identification reopened doors that had been locked for decades. Investigators could now retrace her final movements, re-examine old leads, and search for connections that had been invisible when her identity was unknown. Every new fact brought them closer to understanding not only who Sherri was, but who had taken her future away. For Detective Bean, the case became personal. Each year, he hangs an ornament bearing Sherri's name on a memorial tree dedicated to victims of violent crime. It is a promise that she will not be forgotten. Today, Sherri Jarvis is no longer the nameless girl beside a highway. She is remembered as a daughter, a sister, and a young life that mattered. And while her identity has been restored, the search for justice continues. Somewhere, the final chapter of this story is still waiting to be written.